Imagine living in a world so corrupt that God Himself decided it had to end. Violence filled the earth. Humanity had lost its way. Greed ruled over compassion. Power was abused, and people no longer cared about what was right or just. According to the ancient account in the book of Genesis, the world had become a place where darkness seemed to grow stronger every day. Cities were filled with conflict. Families were divided by selfish ambition. The strong dominated the weak, and corruption spread across the land like a shadow. The Bible describes this moment with powerful words. Every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. Think about that for a moment. A world where kindness was rare. A world where honesty was mocked. A world where violence had become normal. And in the middle of that broken world, millions of people were living their lives. Farmers worked their land. Merchants traded goods. Children were born into a society that was drifting further and further away from goodness. But among all those people, among an entire generation of humanity, one man stood out. His name was Noah. The Bible describes Noah in a very different way from everyone else around him. While the world was drowning in corruption, Noah chose another path. He lived with integrity, he believed in God, and he refused to follow the darkness that surrounded him. He wasn't a king. He wasn't the most powerful man on earth. He wasn't famous. Yet somehow, out of everyone alive at that time, God chose him. Chosen to carry out a mission that would save humanity. Chosen to build something the world had never seen before. Chosen to protect life itself from a coming disaster that would change the course of history. But this raises an incredible question. Out of everyone alive at that time, why did God choose Noah? Before we dive deeper into Noah's story, I want to ask you something. Imagine living in a world where corruption and violence were everywhere, where doing the right thing made you stand out instead of fitting in. If you were surrounded by people who ignored God and chose their own path, would you still choose to do what is right? Would you have the courage to stand alone like Noah did? I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read many of your comments, and your perspective might even inspire future videos. And if you enjoy biblical stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories from the Bible. Long before the floodwaters covered the earth, something far more dangerous had already begun to spread across the world. Humanity had lost its way. According to the book of Genesis, the earth had become filled with people. Cities grew larger, families multiplied, and civilization continued to expand across the land. From the outside, the world may have appeared prosperous and thriving, but beneath the surface, something had gone terribly wrong. The hearts of people were changing. Greed began to replace generosity. Power was used to control rather than to protect. Those who were strong took advantage of the weak, and justice slowly disappeared from everyday life. Imagine walking through one of the ancient cities of that time. Markets filled with merchants shouting over one another, each trying to gain more wealth than the next. Leaders ruling not with wisdom or fairness, but with pride and domination. People willing to lie, cheat, and betray if it meant gaining power or advantage. The atmosphere would have felt heavy with tension. Trust was disappearing. Where once communities may have lived in harmony, now suspicion and conflict filled the streets. Families fought over inheritance. Neighbors competed with one another. Violence began to spread across the land. The Bible describes the situation with a sobering clarity. In Genesis 6, verse 5, it says, The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Think about how powerful that statement is. Not just occasional wrongdoing, not just moments of selfishness, but a society where corruption had become normal. A world where the human heart had drifted so far from goodness that evil was no longer the exception, it was the rule. Violence filled the earth. The strong dominated the weak. Power was abused by those who held authority. People pursued wealth and pleasure without considering the consequences of their actions. Imagine a world where kindness was seen as weakness, a world where honesty was mocked, a world where doing what was right made you stand out in the worst possible way. Generation after generation, humanity continued to drift further away from the moral foundations that once guided them. Instead of choosing humility, people chose pride. Instead of compassion, they chose selfish ambition. And God saw it all. Every act of injustice, every act of cruelty, every broken promise. The Creator of the universe looked upon the earth He had made and saw that it had become deeply corrupted by the choices of humanity. Genesis even tells us something deeply emotional about this moment. It says that God was grieved in His heart. This is a powerful image, the Creator looking at His creation, not only with anger, but with sorrow. The world that was meant to flourish with life, beauty, and harmony had become a place filled with chaos and destruction. Imagine the disappointment, the sadness of seeing humanity turn away from what was good. The earth itself, the Bible says, had become filled with violence. Civilizations that should have built peace instead built conflict. Leaders who should have guided people toward wisdom instead led them into corruption. It seemed as though darkness had taken control of the human story. But even in the darkest times, there can still be a light. Even in a world that had forgotten goodness, there was still someone who remembered. Someone who refused to follow the corruption of the crowd. Someone who chose a different path. Because even in that broken world, one man refused to follow the crowd. In a world that had become overwhelmed by corruption and violence, Noah was different. The Bible introduces him with a description that immediately sets him apart from everyone around him. In a generation where people had turned away from God, Noah chose another path. Genesis tells us that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Those words reveal something remarkable. Noah was not perfect, no human being is, but his life was marked by sincerity, integrity, and a deep commitment to living according to what was right. While others pursued power, wealth, and selfish desires, Noah lived with a different set of values. Imagine what that must have looked like. In a society where lying had become normal, Noah chose honesty. In a culture where violence ruled, Noah chose peace. While others ignored God completely, Noah continued to live with faith and humility. This difference would not have gone unnoticed. Standing apart from the culture around you is never easy. People who live differently are often misunderstood or even mocked, yet Noah remained faithful. He refused to compromise his values simply to fit in with everyone else. But Noah was not alone. He had a family. Genesis tells us that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These sons would eventually become the ancestors of many nations after the flood. Noah also had a wife, and each of his sons had wives of their own. Together, they formed a small but faithful household in the middle of a broken world. Imagine the kind of life Noah built within his family. While corruption filled the cities around them, Noah likely taught his children about integrity, about responsibility, and about honoring God even when others did not. Perhaps in the evenings they gathered together to share meals and talk about the world around them. Perhaps Noah reminded his sons that true strength did not come from dominating others, but from living with righteousness. He taught them that faith was not just something to talk about, it was something to live. In many ways, Noah's family became a small refuge of goodness in a society that had lost its moral direction. They worked, lived, and grew together while the world outside continued to drift further away from God. This kind of life required courage. Imagine raising a family in a culture where nearly everyone around you believed something different. Noah could have chosen the easier path. He could have blended in with the rest of society and ignored the corruption around him, but he didn't. Instead, he chose faithfulness, day after day, year after year, quietly living a life that honored God even when few others did. And that kind of faith does not go unnoticed. The Bible tells us something profound about Noah's life. In Genesis, it says that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Out of all the people alive at that time, among a world filled with corruption, God saw Noah. He saw a man who had not abandoned righteousness, a man who refused to follow the crowd, a man who continued to walk with God even when the rest of the world had turned away. And because of that, Noah caught God's attention.
Out of an entire generation, why Noah? This is one of the most fascinating questions in the story of the Great Flood. The world at that time was filled with millions of people. Some were strong, some were wealthy, some were powerful leaders. Yet God chose none of them. Instead, he chose a man who lived quietly, far from the centers of power. So what made Noah different? The answer can be found in 4 powerful qualities that defined his life: righteousness, faith, obedience, and integrity. 1. Righteousness. First, Noah was a righteous man. The Bible does not describe him as perfect, but it does say he was blameless among the people of his time. In a society where corruption had become normal, Noah chose to live according to what was right. While others lied, cheated, and exploited one another, Noah lived with fairness and honesty. Imagine the difference that would have made. In a marketplace where merchants cheated customers, Noah would have dealt honestly. In a culture where violence solved problems, Noah would have chosen peace. In a world where people pursued selfish ambition, Noah pursued righteousness. That alone made him stand out. But righteousness by itself was not the only reason God chose him. 2. Faith. Noah also had something many people around him lacked. He had faith. Faith is believing in something even when you cannot see it yet. It is trusting God's word even when the world around you tells you that it makes no sense. Noah lived in a time when most people had abandoned faith completely. They trusted their own desires more than they trusted God. But Noah continued to believe. He believed that God's way was still the right path, even if no one else followed it. This kind of faith requires courage. Standing alone in your beliefs is never easy. Yet Noah remained faithful even when his entire society moved in the opposite direction. 3. Obedience. Faith led Noah to something even more important: obedience. Many people say they believe in something, but obedience shows whether that belief is real. Noah didn't just believe in God, he acted on that belief. When God spoke, Noah listened. When God gave instructions, Noah followed. Later in the story, when God tells Noah to build an enormous ark on dry land, Noah obeys without hesitation. He spends years, possibly decades, working on something that must have seemed absurd to everyone around him. But obedience means trusting God even when others do not understand. Noah understood that true faith requires action. 4. integrity. Finally, Noah lived with integrity. Integrity means being the same person in public and private. It means doing what is right even when no one is watching. In a world where corruption was everywhere, Noah's character remained consistent. He did not change his values to fit the culture around him. He did not compromise his beliefs simply to gain approval from others. Instead, he remained faithful to his principles, day after day, year after year. And that kind of character stands out. When we compare Noah to the society around him, the difference becomes clear. The world chased power. Noah pursued righteousness. The world trusted in human ambition. Noah trusted in God. The world ignored divine truth. Noah listened. God was not searching for the strongest man. He was not looking for the richest or the most influential person on earth. God was looking for the most faithful one, and Noah was that man. Because of his righteousness, faith, obedience, and integrity, Noah stood apart from the darkness of his generation. God saw something in him that the world could not see, and because of that, something extraordinary was about to happen. Soon, Noah would receive a message from God, a message that would challenge his faith like never before, a message that would require courage, patience, and unwavering obedience. And soon, Noah would receive a command that would change history forever. After witnessing the corruption and violence that had spread across the earth, God decided that the time had come for judgment. But in the middle of that decision, there was also mercy, because God had chosen Noah. One day, God spoke to Noah with a message that must have been both terrifying and unbelievable. God told Noah that a great flood was coming, waters so powerful that they would cover the earth and destroy all living creatures that breathed the breath of life. Humanity's corruption had reached a point where the world could no longer continue as it was, but Noah and his family would be spared. God had a plan, and that plan began with a command that must have sounded impossible. God told Noah to build an ark, not a small boat, not a simple raft, but a massive structure unlike anything the world had ever seen. Imagine hearing those instructions for the first time. Noah was not a shipbuilder. He had likely never seen a vessel of that size before. Yet God gave him extremely specific instructions about how the ark should be built. According to the book of Genesis, the ark was to measure 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. To understand how enormous that is, we need to translate those ancient measurements. A cubit was roughly the length of a human forearm, about 18 inches. That means the ark would have been approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. That is about the length of 1.5 football fields. In the ancient world, such a structure would have been astonishing. The ark was not designed like a sailing ship with a pointed bow or elegant shape. Instead, it was more like a giant floating box, stable, durable, and capable of surviving violent waters. God also instructed Noah to build it out of gopher wood, a strong material suitable for large construction. The ark would be sealed inside and out with pitch, making it waterproof. Inside, it would have 3 decks, creating multiple levels where animals, supplies, and Noah's family could stay during the flood. A single door would be placed on the side, and a roof would cover the entire structure. Every detail was intentional. But imagine how strange this project must have looked to everyone else. There was one obvious problem. Noah was building a gigantic boat on dry land. There were no oceans nearby, no massive rivers where a vessel of that size would make sense. To the people around him, the project must have seemed ridiculous. As the years passed, the enormous structure slowly began to rise above the landscape. Massive wooden beams formed the frame of the ark. Workers, likely Noah and his sons, cut, shaped, and assembled the wood piece by piece. The ark grew larger and larger, and with it, The whispers and laughter grew louder. People must have stopped to watch. Why is he building that? Has Noah gone mad? A giant boat out here? The idea of a worldwide flood must have sounded absurd to them. Many probably mocked him openly. Some may have laughed at him as they passed by. Others might have questioned his sanity. To them, Noah's decades-long project was nothing more than a strange curiosity. But Noah did not stop. Day after day, he continued working. Year after year, he kept building. His faith was stronger than the voices around him. Even when people doubted him, mocked him, or ignored him completely, Noah trusted that God's warning was real. Slowly, the ark took shape. What once seemed impossible began to stand before the eyes of the world, a massive wooden vessel towering above the land, a symbol of faith in a world that no longer believed. But the strangest part of God's plan had not happened yet, because one day, something extraordinary would begin to happen, something that no one could explain. Animals from across the land would begin moving toward the ark, 2 by 2. And when that moment arrived, the world would realize that Noah's warnings were not madness after all, because something even stranger was about to happen.
Building the ark was not just a physical challenge for Noah. It was a test of faith. Imagine spending years, possibly decades, working on a project that almost no one around you believed in. Day after day, Noah and his family continued building the massive wooden structure exactly as God had commanded. But outside the construction site, the world continued to live as if nothing unusual was happening. People woke up in the morning, went to the markets, worked their land, and carried on with their daily lives. To them, Noah's Ark was nothing more than an odd curiosity, a strange project that had no real purpose. At first, people may have simply been confused. Why was Noah building such a gigantic structure? Why was he working so tirelessly on something that seemed completely unnecessary? But confusion soon turned into something else: mockery. As the years passed and the ark grew larger, it became impossible for people to ignore. The enormous wooden vessel stood in plain sight, towering above the surrounding land. And with that visibility came ridicule. Imagine groups of people gathering nearby just to watch. Some probably laughed openly. Others may have shouted sarcastic comments. "Hey Noah, when are you planning to sail that thing? Do you really think the world is going to flood? Have you lost your mind?" To them, Noah's Ark warning about a coming flood sounded ridiculous. Many people had likely never experienced rain the way we know it today, and the idea that water would cover the entire earth must have seemed impossible. The ark became a symbol, but not of faith in their eyes. It became a symbol of foolishness. Imagine the emotional pressure Noah must have felt. Every day he walked past people who mocked him. Every day he heard laughter and disbelief. Every day he continued building something that the world insisted would never be needed. And yet he kept going, hammer after hammer, beam after beam, year after year. This kind of perseverance reveals something powerful about Noah's character. Faith is easy when everyone agrees with you. Faith is easy when success is immediate and obvious. But real faith appears when no one else believes. Noah did not have proof that the flood was coming. He did not see storm clouds gathering year after year. The sky likely looked calm most of the time. All he had was God's word, and that was enough. The Bible later reflects on Noah's faith in a powerful way. In the New Testament, the book of Hebrews says that Noah built the ark in holy fear, trusting God about events that had not yet been seen. That phrase captures the essence of Noah's journey. He trusted in something invisible. While the world trusted only what they could see, Noah trusted what God had spoken, and that trust gave him strength to continue. His sons likely worked beside him, helping cut wood and assemble the ark's structure. His family stood with him through the long years of construction, believing in the same promise he did. Together, they built not just a vessel of wood and pitch, they built a symbol of faith, a symbol that obedience to God matters, even when the world does not understand. Slowly, the ark reached completion. The massive structure stood ready. And perhaps the people around Noah still believed nothing would ever happen. Perhaps they still laughed. But the moment was approaching when everything would change. Because one day, something completely unexpected began to happen. Animals started appearing from across the land. At first, it may have been only a few, then more and more. Creatures of every kind began walking toward the ark. Lions, deer, birds circling overhead, animals from distant fields and forests. And they were not coming randomly. They were coming in pairs, 2 by 2. No cages, no ropes, no human commands, just animals moving calmly toward the ark as if guided by an unseen force. The laughter began to fade. Confusion replaced mockery, and people started to realize that something extraordinary was unfolding. Because after all those years of ridicule and doubt, something incredible was finally happening. Then one day, the animals began to arrive.
For decades, the ark had stood as a strange and mysterious structure. People had laughed at it. They had mocked Noah's warnings. To them, the giant wooden vessel was nothing more than an absurd project built by a man who believed in an impossible disaster. But everything began to change on one extraordinary day. Animals started appearing. At first, the sight may have seemed ordinary. A pair of deer walking quietly across the fields, 2 birds circling above, perhaps a pair of goats approaching from the hills. But soon the pattern became impossible to ignore. Animals were coming from everywhere. From forests and mountains, from distant valleys and plains, creatures of every kind began moving toward the ark. Massive elephants walked slowly across the land. Lions appeared in pairs. Birds filled the sky overhead while smaller animals moved across the ground. And they all came the same way, 2 by 2. Noah and his family stood at the entrance of the ark as the animals arrived. One by one, they guided the creatures inside the massive vessel. The ark had been carefully designed with multiple levels and spaces for animals, supplies, and living quarters. Everything had been prepared. But outside the ark, people must have watched in stunned silence. For years, they had mocked Noah. Now they were witnessing something they could not explain. Animals that normally feared one another were walking calmly together. Creatures from distant regions were arriving at the same place at the same time. It was as if an unseen force was guiding them. One pair after another stepped through the massive doorway of the ark. Elephants, horses, sheep, wolves, birds fluttering above. The ark slowly filled with life. And then something remarkable happened. Genesis tells us that God himself shut the door of the ark. The enormous door that Noah and his family had left open was suddenly closed. Once it shut, there was no way to open it again from the outside. Inside the ark were Noah, his family, and the animals. Outside, the world continued as usual for a little while longer. Then the sky began to darken. Heavy clouds gathered across the horizon. The air grew thick and heavy. A distant rumble of thunder rolled through the sky, and then the rain began. At first, it may have been only a light drizzle, but soon the storm intensified. Rain poured down with relentless force. The Bible tells us that the rain continued for 40 days and 40 nights. But it was not only rain falling from the sky.
Genesis also says that the fountains of the great deep burst forth, sending water rushing upward from beneath the earth. The flood had begun. Water spread across the land, filling valleys and rivers. Streams became torrents. Fields disappeared beneath the rising waves. Panic must have spread quickly among the people. Those who had laughed at Noah's warnings now faced a terrifying reality. The water continued rising, swallowing villages and cities alike. The rain did not stop. Day after day, the flood grew stronger. Eventually, the water reached the place where the ark had been resting on dry ground, and slowly, the massive vessel began to lift. The ark floated. The enormous structure that had taken years to build now rose above the floodwaters, drifting across a world that was disappearing beneath the storm. Below it, everything was being swept away. Mountains, forests, cities, and fields all slowly vanished beneath the rising water. From the perspective of those inside the ark, the world had transformed into an endless ocean stretching in every direction. No land, no familiar landmarks, only water, and the ark carrying the future of life. The storm raged on, the floodwaters continued to rise, and eventually, the earth as humanity had known it disappeared completely. The world as humanity knew it was gone. As the floodwaters covered the earth and the old world disappeared beneath the rising sea, the ark drifted across the endless waters. Inside that massive wooden vessel, something extraordinary was happening. Life was being preserved. Within the ark were the only surviving humans on earth: Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. 8 people in total. They carried within them the future of humanity. But the ark held more than just a family. It carried the future of life on earth. Every kind of animal had entered the ark before the storm began. Great and small, wild and tame, creatures of every shape and size filled the decks of the enormous vessel. Lions rested in their enclosures. Sheep and goats huddled together. Birds fluttered within the wooden structure, while smaller creatures moved quietly across the floors. The ark was not simply a refuge, it was a living sanctuary. Imagine the responsibility that rested on Noah and his family during those long months. Day after day, they cared for the animals, feeding them, keeping order within the ark, and ensuring that life continued inside the vessel. Outside, the floodwaters erased the world that once existed, but inside the ark, the future was protected. In many ways, Noah had become something remarkable. He had become the guardian of life. While the storm raged across the earth, Noah and his family protected the animals and preserved the possibility of a new beginning for humanity. The ark was not just a structure built from wood and pitch, it was a vessel carrying hope. Every creature inside represented the continuation of life beyond the flood. Every animal that survived would one day repopulate the earth. Every member of Noah's family would carry the human story forward. Think about the weight of that responsibility. Noah was not a king or a warrior, yet through his faith and obedience, he had become the man who saved the world, not by conquering enemies or ruling nations, but by protecting life itself. As the ark floated across the vast ocean that had replaced the old world, Noah and his family waited patiently for the waters to recede. The storm eventually faded, the rain stopped, the violent winds grew quiet, but the waters remained for many months. The ark drifted across the flooded earth, carrying the seeds of a new future, and slowly the time for a new beginning began to approach. Because Noah's story was not finished. The flood was only one chapter in a much larger story, a story about faith, renewal, and the promise of life after destruction.
because even though the flood had changed the world forever, Noah's story didn't end with the flood. After months of drifting across a world covered in water, the ark finally came to rest. The violent storm had long since passed, and the endless rain had stopped. Slowly, the waters that once swallowed the earth began to retreat. Little by little, the hidden land beneath the flood started to appear again. Then one day, the ark settled upon the mountains of Ararat. For the first time since the flood began, the massive vessel was no longer drifting. It rested firmly on solid ground. Inside the ark, Noah and his family waited patiently. Even though the ark had stopped moving, the earth outside was still drying. Noah watched and waited, trusting that the moment to leave would come in God's perfect timing. Eventually, that moment arrived. God spoke to Noah and told him it was time to leave the ark. Imagine what it must have felt like when the great door finally opened. Fresh air rushed inside, sunlight poured through the entrance, illuminating the dark interior of the ark. After so many months enclosed within the wooden vessel, Noah and his family stepped out onto the earth once again. Before them lay a world that looked completely different. The old world, the cities, the crowded communities, the civilization they once knew, was gone. The flood had reshaped the land, leaving behind a quiet and empty earth. It was a new beginning. Behind Noah, the animals began to emerge from the ark. Pairs of creatures stepped out onto the land and scattered across the mountains and valleys. Birds lifted into the sky, filling the air with movement and life once again. The earth was slowly coming back to life. But before doing anything else, Noah paused. His first action on this new earth was not to build a home or plant crops. Instead, Noah built an altar to the Lord. There, he offered sacrifices as a sign of gratitude and worship. It was a moment of deep thankfulness, a recognition that their survival had not been by human strength alone. And in response, God made a powerful promise. He established a covenant with Noah, declaring that never again would a flood destroy all life on earth. Humanity had been given a second chance. The world had been washed clean, and a new chapter in human history was beginning.
The story of Noah is more than just a story about a flood. It is a story about faith, integrity, and courage. In a world where nearly everyone had turned away from what was right, Noah chose a different path. He refused to follow the corruption around him. While others chased power, wealth, and selfish ambition, Noah remained faithful to God. That kind of faith is not easy. Imagine standing alone while everyone around you laughs, doubts, or ignores you. Imagine continuing to do what is right when the entire world seems to be moving in the opposite direction. That was Noah's reality, yet he remained faithful. He trusted God when the future was uncertain. He obeyed when the command seemed impossible. And he held on to integrity when corruption surrounded him on every side. Because of that faith, one man changed the course of history. Through Noah's obedience, life on earth was preserved. Humanity was given another chance. The future of the world was carried safely through the storm. This story reminds us of something powerful. You don't need to be the strongest person to change the world. You don't need wealth, fame, or power. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who refuses to compromise their values. One person who chooses faith over fear. One person who stands firm when everyone else walks away. One faithful person can change the future. That is the lesson of Noah. Even in the darkest moments of history, faith and courage can create the possibility of a new beginning.
And now I want to ask you something. If you were Noah, would you have had the courage to stand alone?